Oh gosh, how are you guys? Sorry, back to
Yeah,
backs.
that's fine. Yeah, don't worry. What is this chair you have? I'm very interested in the chairs founders. You don't know?
No, it's a 9 to 5 furniture.
Oh,
That's
wow.
what it's called.
Yeah. Does this come from a
It's really not
background?
that
You
cool.
grew up in the
It's really not.
Midwest or something, like in a family of hunters or something? Isn't that right?
Sorry. So what do you say?
Did you grow up in a family of like, I feel like if you don't know your brand of chair, I feel like this directionally is the same as you come from like a family of hunters in the Midwest, or I know this is not
What?
exactly, but it's
What are
like,
you talking about?
That's a crazy connection.
That is an insane
no way,
connection.
totally.
I'm into it. I know. I think there's definitely like probably some interesting stuff you can correlate the two. Yeah, no hunters, farmers actually. Farmers,
Gone.
not hunters.
Got it.
You
Yeah.
were close. You were close.
Yeah. People that are builders, really, in a way,
Yeah.
versus like people pushing papers or something, which would be like,
Which is like me now. Yeah, yeah.
right.
My
Yeah.
family was building things. Now I'm just pushing papers. So right.
Now, I've just been like bureaucrats versus build. I'm not accusing. That would be too early in the podcast to accuse you. Will.
I'm accusing. I literally run a bank now, so I'm like this definition of a paper pusher.
Which is
So
amazing.
it's fine.
Well, let's start. Let's start
Yeah.
with an intro. Yeah, William, thanks so much for joining us here. So this is for anybody listening, the week between Christmas and until the early January, where most people are actually vacationing, but we are all founders on this podcast. And so I'm sure that everybody is working this week. I know I definitely am. Everybody else working this week. William, you said you had back-to-backs today. So obviously you're working.
Yeah, I'm in the office right now. It's a little
That's
quiet.
awesome.
It's a little quiet, but there's maybe like a dozen of us holding down the
That's
fort.
great.
So
That's great. Thanks so much for being on. I'll let Julian take it away as the
So
resident host of this podcast.
yeah, I'm so happy to be hosting or whatever this job is. And so Kevin is good enough to introduce us. I'm fascinated by a bunch of things, your background, and your maybe more in the foreground than anything is like your mission orientation as a founder. Yeah, you started obviously like you worked on Plaid for so many years, and you did it essentially straight out of Bain. Is that basically right?
yeah, barely. So I was actually an intern when I was like 20 at Bain, but I like to tell people I worked there for longer so they come older and cooler. But in reality, I started Plaid my senior year in college. And then
Wow.
I only thought it was, I think Zach, who was my co-founder of Plaid, and I, when we started, we thought it was just going to be like, no, we're just going to go build some stuff and just hang out for a year and nothing's really going to work. And then we'll go back to our day jobs. But ended up actually getting a little bit more legs than we thought and ended up
A little bit more legs.
really never having an actual job. So,
We were talking before the recording about this dark period where companies that when you look at the arc or you read the Wikipedia page or something, it's like, oh, this magic thing happened. Then this magic to tell you these milestones from like a retrospect. But I'm curious about kind of the dark period where things weren't working. Like, what was happening there? Was there ever a period of desperation and I didn't know what the hell I was doing? Or
And also, I'll tell you on to that too. William, do you remember where we actually met in person?
that was back at Shyp. That was
Yeah.
back. It
A
was,
homebrew event.
yeah, it was like OG. Like it was like
Yes.
2014 San Francisco.
So the reason I wanted to bring that up was because like of that batch of homebrew companies, I think that we were the standout at the time. And I don't think like that you guys definitely were not known as at all. And I just want to highlight because we're doing this for other founders. And I was at like peak hype cycle out of the gate. And then there you guys are. I was like, oh, you're doing this fintech thing. Nobody really knows where you are. And then like just it completely changes. Also being in the hype cycle fucking sucks. But obviously went through a period of that, maybe still is in there as well. But that's why I kind of wanted to mention that there with Julian's question.
No, I think it's totally right. I come to tell my team, it's like wandering in the desert. Let's wander in the desert for a while and you try to look for the promised land. And I think maybe we'll get to it later. One of the things that I'm most happy about probably over the past couple months is it validated the belief that startups take a long time and they're really, because I think in 2020 to 2022, let's call it.
Yep.
there was this narrative. I'm like, oh my God, if you like bet on the right crypto, if you bet on the right shit coin, like you can be a billionaire overnight. Tiger's not writing $1 billion
Oh,
around you after 2 years. You're doing it.
I hated that so
And,
much.
and like, I've always, sounds like you guys too, like, I've always had this belief that, hey, like companies take 10 years, right? They get like years to maybe figure out the fuck you're doing. And then like 10
Yeah.
years, you've been right. And then there's this narrative shift about 3 years ago. They're like, no, you can actually become like a billionaire in like 18 months if you're smart and you do it right and you like understand how to play the right cycle. And so I feel like maybe a lot of us that have just grounded out in the desert for a long time, it was like super demoralizing.
Mhm.
And I think in many ways it sounds dark. Over the past 3 months, pretty much everybody who was like that just got their faces ripped off. And so,
Well, how does that make you feel?
yeah,
Does
I'm
it-
cool. Like I understand how the world works. Like
Mhm.
my narrative is that
Yes, yes. I
Yeah.
felt the same way. I felt crazy for that period of 2 years. It was just like everybody was just becoming millionaires and billionaires. I'm like, what? Who the fuck's using your product? What is this even
Yeah.
solving?
I feel weird about the people that during the .com boom, because some of them are on TV shows now. We won't name them explicitly. But it's just, what did this guy's company do?
Mark Cuban, you mean?
It could be anyone. I could be talking about anyone. And so but it's, what the fuck did he? And you got to look it up because it's not like PayPal, right? And some people, I guess, more power to them that can make it work. But I agree with you. You really got to, and what it proves, at least for me, is you only get a couple of shots, those 10-year shots. So you really got to care about the thing it is that you're doing. And you've actually basically taken a second 10-year bet in essence.
Yeah, I think if you're super smart, I don't know, you maybe figure out some cheat code. I wouldn't put myself in that camp. I think companies say 10 years and it takes
Yep.
5 years of probably like grinding it out, not knowing it. If you was probably in the middle of that cycle where Kevin and I met. In the end, maybe after year 5, you figure out what the heck you're doing. You figure you have maybe some level of product market fit and you're scaling it and you're like trying to pull all the right levers. But unless you're willing to do that for 10 years, I don't think you can make it successful. And maybe you can take money out in different tranches on the way. But I think for me, I don't really know how to start a company in the way. And so, yeah, I'm in year 2 of a 10-year cycle.
Yeah.
I probably am not going to have any sort of meaningful success again for another 3 to 4.
Why did, some of these people become professional investors? I'm curious what your motivation is. I want to go back again. Derek, like
Yeah.
you said, you didn't explicitly say PTSD. I think definitely you're aware that there's a period of us being in the desert. And you're like, yeah, so okay, let's go again. Was it PTSD like not that strong?
No,
Was strong. You forgot it.
no,
Most other-
it's like it was so strong, it circled back. And so I just blacked out the point where I had PTSD. Actually. No, yeah, I don't know. I guess there were definitely there are some operators who cross over to the investing side and are successful at it. But I think, to be honest, it's hard to find one. I think it's a lot of maybe like mediocre and like people who like maybe like pretended they operated a company or something like that or whatever.
lots of
And
that.
like, they became investors and they're successful. I think it's very hard. I think the skill sets are so different. I think to be an investor, right, you're like a great networker. You're super extroverted. You like to be with people. You like to go
Yeah.
broad on a bunch of topics.
Right.
And you have to be constantly selling yourself and you're selling
Right.
the commodity product, right? Because in the end, investors, it's branding, selling a commodity product, right? A B2B product or something like that. And that's very different than I think founders. Founders are like, no, we're going to differentiate on the product and the delivery
Right.
mechanism is
Right.
kind of like whatever. And so I don't know, I'm definitely probably more the operator side. Like I just can't imagine like my day to day being an investor, trying to go around there and sell money.
Yeah.
It just doesn't really speak to me. I think the economics are super lucrative. When you look at things from
Very.
the return side, yeah, being a venture capitalist or PE guy, like it's so much more lucrative.
Yeah,
And the risk is a lot lower. Your risk is just so much lower versus you're taking a 10-year bet on something and 100% of you being successful is there. I've been there and I thought I was at a Plaid level success or an Uber level of success. And it turns out it was nothing. And I had to restart from nothing.
Yeah.
And now I'm almost at 5 years actually. And now we are actually finding some fit, but it is completely different. And even though that I've met a lot of investors and they say that they've been operators, very few, I can't even think of any that have really done like the 10-year journey and then gone back and been a really successful investor. Cause you're right. It just is a completely different skill set.
There are some, like, you look at them, and you look at the people that Andreessen Horowitz, but even so, if you look for just at Mark Andreessen,
That's a great example. Yeah.
I'm just like, you think of thing that Mark Andreessen invested in versus like Jeff Jordan. Jeff Jordan's actually a better example of an operator and an investor
Right.
because he was able to invest over and over again and like really be on marketplaces. But the purest ones are actually just pure investors. And in a way, because it's a zero sum game, like who gives cash
Mhm.
versus entrepreneurs can succeed in 100 different directions, doing 100 different things. But
Mm.
meanwhile, you got to be good at being in the cave, which is what you're describing.
Right.
Yeah, they don't have skill sets. I think, like, if you look at like the Peter Fens of the world, or whatever, it's kind of like world class investors, right? Like they were like an investor since they came out of the cradle, and that's what you need to do because I think being an investor is hard. The skill set is something I don't have, and you need to do it for 20, 30 years to be really freaking good at it. Just like us, right? To be an operator, you got to start young, and you got to grind it out, and you're like, it is a skill set. And I think just it's very unlikely for an NBA player to be like, oh, I don't know, like sports are all the same. I'm going to go then play the MLB. There's always those that do as
Right.
educators.
Bo
But
Jackson.
yeah, but that's majority can't cross over. And I think it's the same thing with investors and operators. There's always weight the two because they're both like somewhat associated with like tech and startups, like,
Yeah.
but they're just such different practitioners. And I think I think who try to play between the two are like these generalists that don't end up actually going deep on either one. And they end up, I think, becoming the least successful.
Do you also believe that it's by vertical? Because it's like you're going back into fintech. You
Mhm.
could have gone back into another thing. Kevin did the same. I couldn't go
Mhm.
back into real estate. And it was dead to me and the PTSD was too strong. I went into another domain, but you definitely get the head start if you're doing it. So do you believe that like you can only really be world class if you're going into the same thing, getting deeper with your knowledge, starting young, all this other thing? It sounds like you're describing a lifelong journey, essentially.
Yeah, I think specialization definitely helps. I think logistics or commerce or financial services, they're so broad. You can be specialized in a lot of different areas. But yeah, so I think it does help. I think doing consumer is very different than doing like to developers or businesses, enterprise or something like that. So I think it's
Right.
probably almost like I probably have a better luck being an investor than I would be like building a consumer product. Like literally
Right.
no idea. And so I think there's definitely some vertical specificity. Take fintech, for example, like if you look at like unregulated fintech versus TradFi regulated financial
Yeah.
services, which I'm kind of in now, there's like actually way less similarities than you'd think. There's probably more similarities
Really?
with logistics and fintech than regulated banking. They're just so
Right.
much, and I'll be totally honest, they're actually much more different than I initially anticipated when I started this, because I feel like I'm learning more than actually utilizing my existing skill sets.
Can you go deeper on that? I'm really curious. And so for anybody that's not listening, Plaid, I don't know if you want to explain Plaid, William, but now you bought a bank and you're scaling a bank with
Yeah.
APIs and all those things. And to the outside founder or whoever, these seem similar.
No, I think it totally does. I thought they were similar too. I can go 2 minutes. So I started Plaid back in 2012. And what Plaid does is it's an API platform to enable people who are building in financial services to ingest and utilize data from traditional financial institutions. So the classic example there is I want to go pay somebody and I need to go hook up my Bank of America account to this third party app like a Cash App or a Venmo or whatnot to go pay somebody. I need to pull money from my Bank of America account to send to Kevin's Chase. Plaid, we power all that infrastructure. And then at Column, what we do is I actually bought a nationally chartered bank about 2.5 years ago, and it's rebuilt.
Which is freaking awesome, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's awesome. It's also very hard. A lot of
The
people,
headline's awesome.
the headlines like ETFC is real. Bought a bank, rebuilt the entire thing from scratch to be a platform, which the broader point that we're trying to prove here is you think about a traditional financial institution, you bank with it when you're a kid, and then maybe, they're going to do a corporate bond offer, like your Fortune 50 company or something like that. Weird. There's very little corollaries to other industries where there's so little specialization when you have one company that can go so horizontal. Our thesis is actually the financial institution is probably best fit as a platform where there was actually another company distributing those financial products. And so a vertical software company is probably better suited to delivering a financial product to their customer than a bank is. It's like Stripe is probably better, or Shopify, they're better situated to selling financial products to their customers than Bank of America is. Yet, all these software companies are not going to be banks themselves. There's a lot of nuances to that. And so there needs to be this specialized bank that is regulated, that is a bank, but the delivery mechanism is via APIs and technologies. and distributing through these third parties as opposed to directly to a consumer, to a business itself.
It's actually
And
so interesting. I knew about this. It's more interesting the way that you described it than what I originally thought, which was already interesting.
yeah,
Because it makes a lot of sense. Shopify essentially is a giant pipe, millions of buyers inside the pipe. They need a specialized set of financial services, and no one is really able to deliver the back end infrastructure, so to speak, for that set of financial services. Am I saying it right?
yeah, exactly. I'll give it a more niche example, which I like. So take construction. There's this company out there that maybe some of your listeners have heard of. It's called Procore. I think it's an amazing slow companies. I think
Yeah.
I've never heard it. I'm like bastardize a stat or something, but it's 90% of contractors who have over 100 employees use this software. Like they know contractors like cold, right? Like they know it. They know the problems. They build great software for them. They have this crazy distribution. If I'm a bank and I'm trying to like go sell to that construction company, Procore is going to eat my lunch. And so for me, it's how do I enable Procore to actually build a very niche, customized financial product to sell to their customers, right? I want to go sell to Procore. I don't want to go sell to 150,000 contractors out there. I don't have a competitive advantage there. I don't know
Right.
what their needs are. They probably need this very cool, specialized product I didn't really know of. And instead, banks have historically just try to huck down these like generalizable products.
Right.
And so my goal is how do I set up all of these end software companies to build and distribute really great financial products? I think Procore, they said in their filings or whatnot, that they think in the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to generate more money in financial services than they are.
Wow.
And I think that will be time and time again. Because Shopify generates way more money in financial services than they sell.
Right. They do.
You look at across all these vertical software companies, and that's where we're going to see this big explosion. Everybody in the past 5 years have been so obsessed with like consumer fintech, like it's awesome, right? I don't want to shit on it,
Sure.
but like the Chimes, the Venmos, the Square Cash, those are great. Really where the next wave is going to be is in these very specific, vertical specific software companies. That's where the next wave of financial services is going to be.
It's interesting.
Hmm.
What you're speaking to me in such a way that is really foundational to. I run practice. It's specifically for solopreneurs, specifically service-based solopreneurs.
Yeah.
And what we've built a bunch of stuff around it. But really what you discover is the fundamentals is how people get paid. How fast can they get paid?
Mhm.
What ways can they organize getting paid for them? Like, for example, payment plans like really matter to this type of customer. And so I don't want to build that as much as possible. Right? So that's one. And it actually speaks to the name. Naming is so important in my mind for the type of company that you build. Which is why Column is exactly, I want your company to be for me if I use you.
Yeah.
So going back to the initial question, so how much like what does it entail to actually buy and run a bank versus building a software company like Plaid, where you think there's a lot of parallels? Like, did you have to hire a lot of people that are from the banking industry? Did you have to take that on yourself and develop that knowledge internally? How did that work?
Yeah. I mean, so the answer is yes. So we have way more specialization in specific roles than your average technology company, more so at Plaid, because I generally think over the next 5 to 10 years, technology is going to become more commoditized. And so if your only differentiation is I can write better software than my competitors can, that's a pretty weak leg to stand on. And so for me, I think it is that competitive modes, which is one of the reasons I became a bank, is because it also, not only can I differentiate by having these technical barriers, I also have this regulation barriers as well.
Right.
In order to do that, you actually have to be a bank. You have to have the risk and the compliance, the regulatory and the legal, and all that stuff is not something that you can just learn on the job. It requires decades of experience and understanding the nuance and the language and all of that stuff. You can argue whether that should or should not be. It's just like the fact of life. And so if you look at our team is much more heavily rated towards these specialists than the standard EPD, engineering product design sales, that a normal tech company has. And I'd say I knew that getting in, but it's actually been more so the case than I actually ever thought. Because banking is very tightly regulated. It's a very insular world. And that there's some negatives and positives to that. But that's our big value add, right? Because I can go to Julian and
Yeah.
be like, hey, use me. because you're not going to want to do this. And so I
Right.
can charge a pretty nice premium on top of that. I think it's an area that is why it is somewhat commoditized because it's banking. The delivery that I'm in, there's not a lot of competition in the space.
The question is, Column is not backed by anybody else. You're self-funded. And Plaid was famously backed by venture capital, took on hundreds of millions of dollars. Do you have any great war stories from Plur? And also, how much different is it building a company that's self-funded? Because personally, I think that being venture funded, it's got a lot of pros and cons. One of the pros, obviously, being capital and you could hire people. But also, I think one of the other pros can be once you do like product market fit, the pressure is really on to push you. So any war stories or like the differences of building a company that's now not venture funded?
Yeah, totally. So we at Plaid, we have absolutely incredible investors. I'm very lucky. Me not taking money was nothing to do with our existing investors. I think it was just the desire to try something different. I also think that, like it or not, how venture work, it forces you to think in kind of 5 to 10 years. So you have these fun life, right? Like they need their money back. I get it. If I'm them, it's screw you. I want to do something for 20 plus years. And I think that's very challenging to do with a different type. Maybe you can do it with some investors, it just makes it a little bit hard. Yeah. I also think the thing with venture is it's crack. It's really hard to get off of. It's nice, but it's really hard to get off of. And the nice thing about if you self-fund or you're bootstrapped, it's preserving optionality. And so I don't know, like maybe there's a chance in the next couple of years we take on money. Maybe we take it in 10 years. I don't really know, but I have full options in front of myself.
Yeah.
And if I would have taken like a bit of money, they would have it would have put me on the clock. And then I probably would have wanted to go faster or move harder or whatnot. And then kept picking the money. I also think for a lot of first time founders, venture provides a structure. It provides a framework. It provides somebody kind of like whipping you and be like, let's go. I don't really have that anymore. A lot of gumption, I want to drive. Like I want to make this work. And so I don't think I don't need that. But costs to me at this point are like, they don't really have the concept on that way of pros here. So I think the other thing is as a founder, you guys probably already know this, you dilute, you do a majority of your dilution in the first 2 or 3 rounds. Growth rounds after product market fit. If you're taking like founder refreshers 5%, it's like, they can be like somewhat dilution insensitive. In the early days, you're like, oh yeah, here's 25% of my company. It's crazy.
Absolutely.
And there's one point there. Can you, and if you're not willing to talk about it, then we can cut this out as well. Can you talk about the refresh portion of like when you do raise venture and later stage rounds? Like what did you actually mean there?
Yeah. So if you think about dilution, right? I guess people can't really see my hands, but your seed round or your notes or whatever are going to be like pretty diluted. I'd say maybe not the last year, but like this year, kind of back when we all started original.
Normal dilution.
You're like, I'm going to go with like
30%.
Like, we're going to 2 years back to $10 million valuation or something like that. And then your Series A is going to be a little less dilutive. And as you get larger, you're raising like $300 million bucks, $10 to $15 billion valuation or something. Just inherently, that's not that crazy dilutive. And then usually at that point, you're 4, 5, 6 years in your cycle. And so you as a founder, you're like fully vested. Usually a lot of times what happens, investors will come in and you can actually start to do founder refresh vestors, right? So I'm going to go take a certain part of this company and I'm actually going to get that over another 4 to 5 years, just like you would with an employee. Any employee who hits the whole vesting schedule, usually going to give them a refresher. And so they still have forward visibility into that. And when you calculate that out, plus the growth stage dilution, you end up actually not diluting a ton of the company as you start to get into these growth stage rounds. Obviously, you have to stay there for a while, but it's relatively insensitive. And so when you look at hey, I used to own 50% and now I own 10%, that usually happens in seed, Series A, Series B. For me, if I look at it, I'm like, wow, looking at that math, if I can survive as long as I can, as far as I can, it's like free money. It's free money for me.
This is a bit of inside baseball, but it's super, you're right to point that out. It's true. I don't know where you were at, like in terms of ownership, but like at some point you just start to realize that the level of ownership, if your company is successful, is actually not that meaningful. I don't know how you feel about this, but it's like, I was talking to the founder of ConvertKit the other day. His name is Nathan Barry. His company is in, we would call, I don't know, I know the numbers, but in the tens of millions of dollars of revenue. Still, he's never taken a venture round. And so he owns almost all of it. And there's a couple of things that are going on there. One is he's off the traditional venture path. So is he growing 100% year over year? If he's not growing 100% year over year, even with that tens of millions of dollars of revenue, maybe he can't even get venture in the same
Right.
way that he could because it's not growing to the same scale. So you got to like figure out this math where it's not just how much am I willing to spend today? Because some of these people, some listeners say here might be willing to say, oh, I'll fund the seed round, but am I willing to fund the Series A round? Ooh, can fund the Series B round. So you kind of have to figure out your risk profile forward to say, I got to keep growing. And I'm also curious as to whether, Bill, you have the pressure helps you in any way, or maybe you have different pressure because it's your cash or something.
No, here, I think that's a very valid point, right? Like the longer you wait to take on venture, you're increasing the risk, right? Because
Mm.
the earlier stage rounds, people are more forgiving. They're willing to be like,
Yep.
oh, this metric's off, whatever, it's fine, it's early, right? But as you start to get higher up the value chain, yeah, the metrics start to get pretty damn tight, and that stuff matters a ton. I think if you can bootstrap it, I think that for as long as you can, I think it is pretty lucrative. You look at maybe you listen
MailChimp.
with a company called like Checkout, right? So let's get him, yeah, right. He didn't take on venture till way in his life cycle. And now he owns
Right.
60% of this company. And he
Right.
is probably, if you look at it from a pure cash perspective or pure market cap perspective, he's wealthier than both of the Collison brothers, even
Right.
though Checkout is meaningfully smaller than Stripe. I think there's be like this interesting graph where it shows like your average company growth and your ownership percentage.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many founders that own 50 to 100% of these like single digit $1 billion companies that are way wealthier and way more successful than these like 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 billion companies. They don't have the same hype around them, the same, not like, same brand. But I think when you look at it just from a pure success financially perspective, these guys that have started these 500 to $2 billion companies, they own the majority of, are usually some of the wealthiest and most successful people.
I'm curious, and it's a question, and I'll answer it myself. For all you guys, would you rather a larger company with a lower ownership percentage? So you could say it's more impactful, right? So say it's $100 billion company and you own 5 or 10%, or you take what it was Aaron Levy when they IPO'd. I think he got diluted down to like 2%, 3%, or something crazy like that. And also him building that company back up till like overtake Dropbox was a whole other story. My personal perspective would be, and I tell founders not to worry about the dilution at all. It doesn't matter. Like when you're going and looking to raise so for Airhouse, like we could have taken like a $10 million seed at, I don't know, 20. And this is before like the crazy
Back in the day.
2020.
Right.
Yeah, this is when I started in 2018. I don't know, $10 million Series A and taking like 25% dilution or something like that. I was like, no, I don't really want to do that because I want to make sure that I want to get the right markings. I'm still not sure how to navigate this new company and I want to save the optionality. So to have a lower valuation and maybe take higher dilution and then just take money as we need it. Knowing before I did the opposite. So with Shyp, like I was going and I had basically John Doe bid Mark Andreessen. I don't think actually Mark Andreessen was going to do the deal, but I convinced John Doerr that he was going to. So I bid the valuation. I think we were at like 220 million post and we had, $2 million in gross revenue. It was just outrageous. And this is in 2015 when Uber was all the hype and we were the Uber up. Yeah. And looking back at that, and at the time, I want to protect my dilution and all this stuff, but like I removed all of this optionality for me. So like for me personally, like I'm out now to build the biggest, most meaningful company, even if that does meaning owning less ownership. But I'm curious of but also on the way, and as you get to 5 years, 6 years, taking refresh grants and all that, of course, I'll do that. I'm curious what you guys think about doing this for your second time.
Hey, go ahead, William. I'll go after.
This argument, also one of my best friends runs like a very large successful tech company as well. And it kind of always this argument, would you rather own 10% of a $10 billion company or 100% of a $1 billion company? And I think there's really good pros and cons of both, right? Because the $10 billion company gives you probably more impact, gives you a better brand, you have more influence. You can probably be part of conversations that you aren't part of as a $1 billion founder or something like that. On the other side, owning 100% of a billion-dollar company, I think gives you a huge amount of life flexibility. And I think gives you a lot of control, how you spend your life, how you spend your time, and what you want to do with your company. So I probably personally would rather own 100% of a billion-dollar company than 10% of a 10 billion. I think to your point though, I think the difference between 20% and 40% is negligible. I think the difference between 50% and 100% is massive.
Sure.
Right? Like
Right.
For
the
us.
majority of your company or
Yeah.
no. And because I do agree. I think if you're just you're gonna be like, hey, I'm gonna take the crack. I'm gonna go to the venture route. I agree with you. Fuck it. Let's just go. Just go do it. Long-term difference between 5 and 7%, it's irrelevant.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just grow big. But I think when you're early, you make that decision of, do I want to long-term own 10% or do I want to long-term own 70%? That's
Right.
a psychological thing and a strategic thing that you can think through. And the only reason I'm on one side is because I think it's very easy to go one way. It's very easy to go the other way. Impossible to go the other way. Maybe you can like some crazy recap thing, but let's go.
You only have one shot at getting to the 70% once you make any choice. Or actually, I'll even say, even if you have a bad couple of years and you need the money all of a sudden, then all of a sudden that ability to keep 70% is gone. If you're at all on that train. My issue is for some reason, I don't know why, but I feel like I want to be Jack Dorsey instead of just some anonymous hedge fund dude. There's something wrong with me. So I will take the larger company with the larger impact and the larger brand. But I'll tell you what I discovered is I used to think that my personal brand mattered, and I discovered that it doesn't. After you run a company, people know the name of your company. I don't give a shit if they know my name. That doesn't matter to me the way that I thought.
I totally agree with all that. I think it's hard, right? I think it's a luxury to have either one. I was over the weekend, I was hanging out with this guy. He owned this company you guys have never heard of. And he was like, oh yeah, man, I feel like nobody's ever heard of me, all this other company, blah, blah, blah. I feel like we're super successful. He lives down south. And he kind of had this like FOMO for Silicon Valley a little bit. And then I talked to him and started getting out some financials and stuff like that. He owns 100% of this company. It's putting off about $500 million in EBITDA that he takes every single year. And he's then he started 2 other companies. He has this amazing foundation. He's built up with his school. I'm like, dude, you are winning. There's a ladder here. You're at the top and everybody is at the bottom looking down. You figured it out. And obviously that's a such far extreme of success, but it is interesting, right? No matter which side you pick, there's always a little bit of FOMO.
Right. Of course.
FOMO on either side. Because the random hedge fund guy, is making $2 billion in profits a year. Oh man, I can't get invited to Sun Valley. And the founder who started a hypey company gets to go hang out at Sun Valley and is not near successful. So there's always a little bit of fun.
It's fun in New York. You get invited to the hedge fund breakfasts. Okay. And so what happens, William, I'm sure you at some point been to some of them, these either hedge funds or private equity funds is the head of the dude. It would be he will talk to you and he'll invite you to a private breakfast place. And a waiter comes in and they're just serving you and there's caviar and all this crap. I remember really being excited by the idea of this happening. And then all of a sudden you're wait, I don't have the commensurate wealth, proportionate to any of this at all. So actually I'd much rather have the wealth and not have the breakfast. The breakfast is fucking useless. Yeah. And maybe my thinking is wrong a little.
Yeah, no, I think life is always just, are we chasing status? Are we chasing fame? Are we chasing money? Are we chasing relevance? What are we chasing? And you probably go through different life and you start to optimize for different things. I think I constantly have this quandary, which is how much fame or how much status should I be chasing? I think objectively I'm chasing money. We probably all are to an extent. And then
definitely. Yeah.
Are we chasing control? Are we chasing status and fame? Because I think those two things are very different. And tend to be diametrically opposed. And I constantly am figuring it out and I don't know which one.
For me, it's constantly changing. Sure. I'm curious, do you have any war stories from Plaid?
Oh my God, too many. I think probably.
What can you say? Come on, give us some juice here. The founders want to know, when did you almost not make payroll, or how bad did it get? Or
I have war stories from 2 weeks ago. So, I don't even know.
Hey, whatever you got.
No, I have too many. And probably, unfortunately, you guys know, the really good ones you can probably never tell. But I'll tell one because it involved shitting on a VC firm I dislike. So it was at our Series A. And we were just starting to take off. We were cool enough. We had millions of dollars in revenue. Enough when we pitched VCs, they actually wanted to invest. You weren't begging them. And so went through pretty good round, a bunch of people wanted to give us money. And there was one VC that was a super name brand. Everyone had heard of them. And we picked them and we were like, cool, let's do it. We signed the term sheet. We then did the rounds with all the other investors, called them up and like, hey, you're amazing. Let's keep the conversation going to next year. We're probably going to pass this round, but let's stay in contact. And so we just rejected all these guys who spent a lot of time to the term sheet. And we like hang out with this guy, with these investors, cause like they're an investor now, signed the term sheet. Money was supposed to come on Monday. And we had this kind of competitor, it was kind of like the old annoying competitor in the room called Yoda. And they found out that we signed a term sheet and they put together a patent litigation lawsuit and sued us on Friday. And we were like, oh shit, thank God we just signed this term sheet because this is going to be expensive. This is terrible. And ended up, Greg told the venture fund, they're like, okay, yeah, okay, cool, whatever. And we're probably 3 weeks away from missing payroll at this point, but whatever. Money's coming on Monday.
Right.
On Sunday, this fund calls us like, yeah, we're just like doing some follow-up diligence, had heard that blah, 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 the litigation. And I just don't make it something we're comfortable doing. And we're like, no, we signed the fucking document, bro. Give us some money. And they ended up backing out, this is like a
Wow.
so like everybody have heard of them and just not even class act, just like total assholes, weren't classy about it. Just got scared because like litigation. What the fuck, guys? Come on, grow up.
That's nothing. To be clear, like
we like creamed this company like 9 months late, ended up making money out of the deal. F you.
right.
And but it was terrible. And so we had to like go hat in hand to these other investors and we're like, hey guys, remember us? We like the assholes who rejected you. By the way, we got a term sheet pulled and we got sued. And so please help us out. And our number 2 on the list that we picked was this fund called NEA. We love them. They were great. Ended up going with another fund. And I'll never forget, there's this partner, they're like super cool about it. They're like, hey guys, totally get it. This sucks. By the way, burn's going to go way up. So we got to pay a bunch of lawyer fees. This sucks for you. We don't want you guys to be diluted because of this. So actually we'll just proactively do a high evaluation so you guys have the same dilution.
Hell
and
yeah.
money like three days later. And they were just like, fucking
Wow. That's great.
ended up making the insane amount of money. So it worked out on both sides, but they're like, what the fuck? And this other fund, just total assholes about it. And I like talk to this fund every now and then now too. And they like tried to laugh about the situation. I was like, no guys, I literally hate you.
We
I
were
will
3
shit on
weeks
you.
away from
Every single
payroll.
person I could talk to. So yeah, so that's when we got our term sheet pulled. And to this day, I've rarely ever heard of another company who literally got after their signed term sheet, had wire instructions they pulled. It was just like crazy.
I've never heard of that before. With all the diligence done, signed term sheet, wire instructions. I've never heard of that before. That's
Series A
crazy.
especially.
And
And
a top tier fund as well.
Oh yeah, top 2 or 3. Like
Wow.
single word, they tell enough to let people
there is there's an expression I learned from VCs back in the day when people do this to you. It's called, the expression that I've heard from a VC is, this is called grin fucking. As they're smiling, they're like, hey, yeah, absolutely. They're completely fucking you over at the same time as they're doing it. It's interesting, benefited also from somebody probably looking at this fund and being like, I want to kill those guys. I hate those guys. So I'm going to do this.
Yeah. There was maybe this implicit agreement when we signed with NEA. We're like, yeah, we're all going to badmouth this VC, right? Yeah, we all win, but it's fine.
But that it brings up a great point. I don't think a lot of people that are like, if they're either like a first time venture founder, realize how hard these rounds are actually to get them across the line, what it actually takes. Like from the initial pitches to the initial term sheets, to the negotiations, to the diligence, to like money hitting the bank. And then I've talked before with Jillian, like how many times how close we've been to actually running out of money. Like it's very common to be weeks away from running out to not making payroll. And nobody really talks about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We're very successful companies. Like I'm sure you guys are doing great.
It's crazy. They expect the founders to be normal after this, right? After round after round. They're like, oh yeah, these people I'm sure are very mentally well adjusted, even though weeks of not making payroll, someone pulling a term sheet at the A, all these other things that happen to you. And then you're supposed to go to a party and just be like a completely normal human as if you have normal human experiences.
Yeah.
You don't. you're gone, right? Way gone.
The whole Silicon Valley fundraising thing. It's like such this weird psychological thing. It's like you have these people, they do these like parades to these different offices, and you're
Oh
like, who's
yeah.
there? Can I have some money? Like, here's all about me. It's so weird. It's like weird, like adult level interviewing with like higher consequences. And when you get larger, you're like, okay, now you're no longer, now you're going to like you do like the sovereign wealth fund circuit. And then, when you're public, then I guess you go to like the mutual fund circuit, right? It's the same
Right.
thing, but
Right.
it's so weird. It's like a weird societal construct we've gotten ourselves into.
When you guys were scaling your companies and had some tractions, I don't know, A/B rounds or something like that, did you ever have I remember this myself. Did you ever have like your first experience with a high profile person that you hired that actually quit and you thought it was like the end of your?
Yeah, like a lot of old stories.
Tell us some or one.
I definitely had somebody who like rage quit in 3 weeks. And I spent
shit.
like 3 months trying to convince them and sell them. And they got into like, this is like a fucking hot mess. Like, what? And looking back, you're like, oh my God, that person was toxic. Thank God I didn't hire the person. But I think even more so than investors, like you live in fear of your employees so much more than your investors because you have so much writing, you have so much emotion, and you have so much time invested in these.
Right.
And I've had it happen so many times and it's absolutely terrible. It's one person 3 weeks in and they're like, this is not what I signed up for. This is like way too of a hot mess. I thought you guys had your shit way more.
Julie, how about you?
I had one guy, he was like a head of support, which is a senior title, but it was actually pretty important for us. And it was in 3 weeks and he just stopped responding to emails. And he stopped the meetings, didn't quit, just like ghosted all of us. And we're like, oh man, like probably some like health then. And like, he responded to one text message, like, oh yeah, I'll be online in a second. And like, he went on for this for 3 to 4 weeks. And like, it was a total mindfuck. We were like, what do we do? Like, maybe they died. What had happened? You're like trying to do step down one-on-ones with your team and you're trying to play it off. You're like, oh yeah, so they have some like health reasons. Like there's some personal stuff. Like, sorry about this. Don't worry about it. But then you're like, what do? Do you like kind of like fire the person without another story? Do you hire somebody else?
Yeah.
You like put in this like
Right.
really crazy situation. And like, we honestly didn't know what to do. And the crazy part of it is we finally fired the person, ended up getting like some gear back a couple months later. And this person asked me for a reference check for a job like 2 years ago.
Wow.
Do you remember what happened 6 years ago? How do you think this is appropriate? And I was like, yeah, I literally said, I was like, hey, I will absolutely do a reference check. I just want to be like very transparent that it will be a terrible reference check. So I'm not quite sure you want to use me as a reference. And they were like, oh, that's like super sad to hear. That's really disappointing for me. You ghosted me in the company for 3 months. It was crazy.
Really, it's awesome. But also, I think for people that aren't founders, they're so surprised. Maybe not so much on the VC side, but on the employee side, how honest you'll be with another founder on like how this person really was. Like I, for one, it's my duty to warn, or if they're amazing, to tell them how great they were. And people just don't realize how much weight that really carries. Cause like you as a founder, you've been in that seat before. And the same thing with the VCs. If you have term sheet from this unnamed firm that you named, William, like I want to know who that is after this, but like those are real things and they carry so much weight for me that I don't think people really understand. And also that now, especially with Telegraph and WhatsApp groups and all these other things, like stuff gets around so quickly. And founders, I think because we share this, I don't know, this bond that we're just willing to share a lot more. And we're just a lot more open because we know what everybody else has been through.
So I remember the closest one that happened to me is when I was doing an early product interview here at this company. And someone had like slipped through the process where I had interviewed them 2 or 3. And by the way, I have a hardcore interviewing process, but somehow this person has gone through. I get to the reference check stage. I call a high level founder that I had not channeled to, but I had never personally talked to before. I get on the phone with them. It's one of those people who like, you see them on Zoom and they have no furniture, but they were extremely rich, but they just never gotten around to buying furniture. It's like one of those guys. And so I'm like, hey, so what's the situation with this dude? He goes, how big is your company? At the time, I said 15 people. He goes, do not hire them under any circumstances. I said, okay, what is it? He said, this person needs to learn how to be a product manager at a really big company before they actually do it.
Yeah.
They shouldn't learn their training wheels with you. No way this person would ever say that on an official reference call, if not from a really nice reference that's like really well connected to me. So it's just like there's so much going back to that PTSD. It resonates with me, William, that you're saying that you have PTSD, you use that word. It really validates that I'm not cool. I really appreciate it. It's because we all go through the same kind of trauma. We don't want this other person to go through it.
Yeah, no, references are like when people provide references, I don't know, like they're a total waste. I don't think I've ever really learned something from a reference that somebody provided. Usually all the references are through back channel references. That's actually
Right.
provided by you. The problem is when you're breaking a new industry or doing something, or like you're hiring a specialist and you don't have a bad channel, it's like scary, especially on the exec side. Because, you can ask them for the references, but like it's going to be a wash. And so it is challenging, but I totally agree with you, Julian. Getting references from other founders, from other people is super critical. I think it's a duty that founders do have too, to be honest. Cause I think there's always a little bit there's a little bit of like guilt. Cause you're like, oh no, I like fired this person or whatever. I don't want to help them out. I don't want to like totally screw them over, give them a bad reference, but I think it is pretty important to be totally brutally honest.
Another quick instinct, which is an interesting thing I want to hear as someone who has hired a fair amount of people. You've certainly done more. And what I want to hear is typically you have this one feeling about someone and you're like, like maybe this person is not as good as I thought they were. And then you're like, and you like second guess yourself for a while. And then a second thing happens. Then you second guess yourself for some time. And then a third thing happens and then you let them go. I want to know if now that you've done it so many times, do you just instantly let them go the first time that you have the experience? What is your level for you of, I've done this enough times, so I know when my gut is right. And I know when I have this feeling I need to respond in this way.
I feel like the standard trope is like, it's like you've never fired somebody too early, which I think is totally
Yeah.
right. Every time you fire somebody, you're like, oh my God, this is great. Like, why didn't I fire them 3 months ago? But it's such a hard lesson to actually like put into practice.
It is.
I think I like still to this day, I think I fire people way too late because you get so emotionally invested in it. There's always an excuse. But yeah, once you get in your brain that somebody's a low performer, it's so hard to go back from. And yeah, if I was a good person, I would just fire them super quick and just be done with it. I will say, after hiring literally thousands of people,
Right.
I still probably fall to the same mistake that I did when I was like 24 and I fired people too late. Because I think there's just such an emotional component to it. That's really hard.
Great. Do you guys want to end it on that note?
Right. Yeah.
And
Firing people. Yep. Love it. William, thank you so much for your time. Now, as everybody that's not a founder or working in a startup is having vacations and off in sunny places we're working, hope everybody enjoyed the episode. And thanks again for joining us, William.
Kevin and Julian, I do appreciate and let me know. Send me an email if you want to know the name of the shitty VC firm that.
Oh, yes. Incoming. All right. Thanks, man.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Planner.
Bye-bye.
Second Time Founders podcast, talking tech news. The show is a must, not some billionaire trying to sell you their book. We're coming from a real place, plenty ups and downs, got some insights. Join the discussion now. We being honest and raw, giving you real talk. We've been at the bottom and made it happen and much more. The Second Time Founders podcast, more building, less talk.